Hi, I'm Susan Weiss-Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings. And in this season, we're interviewing homeschool veterans who are sharing their hard-earned wisdom with us and homeschool graduates reflecting on their experiences. So in that vein, today we have Julie Bogart back with us.
Yay!
Thank you for coming.
Yay, Julie! My favorite place to come. I love being invited here.
This is Julie's third time on the podcast,
Wow.
And she actually has a new book out now. It is called Help My Kid Hates Writing, How to Turn a Struggling Student into a Brave Writer. We're going to ask Julie to talk about that more at the end after we chat. But Julie, it is such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
I always love being here, Susan. You are too fun to talk to. And Susanna, I've loved getting to know you. So thanks for having me back.
Yes. For those of you who are joining the podcast, maybe more recently, could you give a brief overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm a homeschool mother of 5. They're all grown adults who have now given me 4 grandchildren, for which I'm grateful.
Okay, can you give us your kids' ages, just because then we can situate you in the geological eras of homeschool where you and I live together.
Yes. So my oldest was born in 1987, and he's coming up on his 38th birthday. So I'm a 1990s and 2000s homeschooler. That's my era. And then my next daughter just earned her master's and graduated yesterday.
Oh, wonderful.
I know, in marriage and family therapy. So I was up at Ohio State with her. She's 35, has a husband and a son. Then I have a son who's a human rights lawyer. He's 33. Wow. He works in Washington, D.C., just moved back from Thailand, where he was for 6 years. And then I have another son who lives locally in Cincinnati, and he is 30 and works as an IT specialist for Procter & Gamble. And my youngest daughter lives in Los Angeles. She's 28, and she is also a marriage and family therapist working with teens.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, wow.
So it all worked out.
Yeah.
But we're going to get into the places where it didn't feel like it was going
to. No, it's so funny how your kids have gone off into such different directions.
I've already done it. I've already forgotten to talk about my work, which I should. I worked as a freelance writer, magazine editor, ghostwriter in the 1990s. And around 1997, 98, I started giving homeschool support in the area of writing instruction. I did it online. I did it in person. I led a Sunday school class that taught writing. And that evolved into a company called Brave Writer, which is 25 years old this year. And we offer all kinds of products and classes, but I'm also an author in my own right. So I have a book called The Brave Learner. Susan wrote the foreword for, which is like my favorite thing ever, a book on raising critical thinkers. And then my new one, Help My Kid Hates Writing. So that's the details of who I am.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So now we'll jump into a little bit about your backstory. And since we are talking specifically about your homeschool journey, tell us a little bit about your first impression, your first encounter with homeschooling, and then why you decided to go for it.
I love this question because, Susan, when I first heard about homeschooling, I didn't even know that was a word. I was in Spain for a missionary training, and I wasn't even engaged yet. So I didn't have children. This is 1984. Mm-hmm. And the good friend of my soon-to-be husband, although we weren't engaged yet, came up to me and started checking me out, sizing me up for his friend. And he asked me, he said, "Are you going to homeschool your children?" And I literally said back, "Home what? Homeschool? What is that?" Had never heard the word pair, never heard it together. And he's launched into this, we can't trust the government. We need to protect our children from communism. We should say the pledge. Like, it was a very politically driven model. And I was sort of like, huh? And then all of a sudden, he pivoted and started talking about tailor-made education for children. Mm-hmm. He had 3 kids, and he started telling me these amazing things his wife was doing with his kids. And by the end of his 15-minute sort of rant explanation, I was like, yeah, I think I do want to do that. And he turned around and he yells to my then almost husband, fiance, "John, she's okay." So that's how I heard about it.
So, Julie, can I say that is, on the one hand, kind of sweet, but also pretty creepy?
I mean, absurd, honestly. Absurd is the right word there that you're looking for. But interestingly, that family became role models to me. We spent time with them, and their children were incredible. And of course, their mother was incredible because homeschool mothers are, but they just had this like sweetness about them. And the kids were so engaged in, communicating with adults and reading books all day. And I was like, yeah, I want that. That seems amazing.
I'm really glad that was your introduction and that has worked out for you. And obviously, you have been a incredibly successful homeschooler. I'm sorry. I just feel like I want to say to any young unmarried women who might be listening, if somebody that you're dating asks you if you're going to homeschool as a way to see if you're marriage material, I would steer clear of that. Well, as a criteria.
I mean, this was the friend, right? So he was, and I agree.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but also like, no. And here's what's really wild. My husband I didn't know him that well. I mean, we got married very quickly. We hardly knew each other. But I found out after we were married that his sister was homeschooling their kids. And this was when it was illegal in California. Right. So there was a lot of homeschooling around me. I was kind of in that subculture, but I was young enough that I didn't know about it yet. What's interesting for me is that while I lived in North Africa, I didn't have children. And so I just read about it. And by the time we moved home to the States, it was time to start homeschooling. And by then I was just persuaded from the literature itself. Right. And I think for me, I love to share this because parents don't expect me to say it. I had such a good public school education. It was so like 1970s creative, immersive, kinesthetic, project oriented that I wanted that for my kids. And that's what I saw reflected in the homeschool literature. And it wasn't in school anymore. And so weirdly, I was like, well, the only way to give my kids what I got in public school is to keep them home. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah. That is really interesting story. I know. The 80s were a weird time. You and I remember them.
I do.
So given that your first encounter was a bit of a mixed bag, it kind of started one way and pivoted, and there's a lot of pressure there. Did you have any fears from that and the rest of, I mean, you did a lot of reading too, but did you have any fears before you got started?
I went in with a lot of unbridled confidence. I think I was an attachment parent, so I really thought being with my kids was like the bee's knees. I didn't have any issues like I don't want to be with them. I really did. And as school was approaching, all I could imagine was endless paperwork and not being with my children. And I'm not good at paperwork, and I love being with my kids. So it was kind of an easy decision. I do remember going to a pediatrician once with Noah in kindergarten age. And the pediatrician said, "Lucky you're out of kindergarten." And Noah said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, no, sorry, he's homeschooled." And then the pediatrician said to me, "What's that?" So, even in the early 90s, this was like 1991, people weren't familiar with it. So I think what was interesting, and Susan, you were a second gen, so I don't know if you had this experience, but as an adult doing it for the first time, I felt like a pioneer, and I love that feeling. Yeah. So there's this little, crusader in me that enjoys kind of, I home birthed, I breastfed. I kind of liked sort of going countercultural, but that doesn't mean I didn't have doubts about methods. So I didn't really doubt the decision, but what came after was, well, what kind of homeschool, right? That seemed to be the bigger dilemma for me.
Okay, sometime you and I have to talk about home birth, but we won't get too distracted right now.
Okay.
But I feel like we need to have, on your fourth appearance on our show, I want to talk about that. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm the daughter of a doctor. So, that was never really an option for me, and I want to know more. Okay.
Okay, great.
But let's not get distracted. Susanna, carry on with your questions, which are well organized, and I keep pulling you away from it.
No, you're all good. Actually, I think, Julie, you hinted at maybe where we should pull the thread a little bit there, that you did a lot of research before you started homeschooling, but what method was the big question. So how did you sort that out, and did your ideal method change at all over time?
Yes. You were saying earlier that sometimes a theme emerges. And for me, this is the theme of everything I think about homeschooling. I think when I began homeschooling, I assumed I had to adopt a method perfectly in order to know whether or not it was effective. Because if I didn't adopt it perfectly, then maybe it's just my fault for not doing it right, And so there was this sort of doctrinaire attitude that I adopted. And I started with a program way back in the day called Konos, which I'm grateful
I
for.
remember Konos.
Do you?
I do. Yes.
And I'm glad that's how I started. I was in a group of 5 other homeschooling families. We threw a party every month that celebrated one of the topics. We did all the kinesthetic activities together. So that part was wonderful. But I also felt like I had to have a math program and a writing program and, all the things to go with it. And I started to flounder because I started having lots of children. I was of the school that you should have unlimited babies, right? And so, when you have 5 kids under 9, it's just harder. I'll just say that. It just gets a little more complicated. So I started being told by my colleagues, other friends who homeschooled, you need structure, you need a schedule, you need to block out times of day. So I remember getting these teacher manuals and or calendars, and I had one for each of my 2 oldest kids. And Susan, you'd laugh. I had everything broken out by day of the week, subject area. And then I would write little margin love notes to my children to soften the impact of this rigorous schedule.
And how did that work for you, Julie?
Yeah. So, and stickers. I thought stickers and love notes will fix this. One day, after 3 weeks of successfully implementing this very rigorous plan, my son Noah woke up and I was urging him to come down for breakfast. And he said, "I hate my life."
Oh.
He didn't say, "I hate school." He didn't say, "I hate math." He just said the whole life did not work for him. And the sad thing was, I was just starting to love mine. I was feeling very in control suddenly. I felt like we were doing all the things that made me feel good about home education. And so this clash where my child was not thriving while I thought I was a crisis. And it was the beginning of me really understanding what tailor-made education actually is.
Yeah.
Not tailor-made to my personality, but like to 5 human beings that were what I like to call kids free radicals. You can't predict their patterns. You don't know what they're going to do or say or think. And that sent me on a journey of actually being curious about lots of methods and adopting lots of aspects of those methods and not being a purist at all.
I wonder if it might be encouraging to moms of younger children to know that I think this is a shared experience among those of us who have gone all the way through, that there's a point at which your kids say, "I hate this."
Yes.
And it just happens. It happens because you're desperately trying to get all your ducks in a row and the ducks are flapping around like crazy and it's annoying you. And your motivations are the best in the world. But I think every mom, particularly moms with multiple children who are homeschooling, get to the point where you're like, okay, this is not working. And I think the important part of this story is not that your kid says, "I hate my life." Because I mean, one of my children said, "I feel like I'm in a purgatory that I'll never get out of."
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness.
So it happens. Look, it happened
Right.
to me. It happened to Julie. I think it just happens.
I do too.
And it feels like a stab to the heart. But the important thing is that you stop and listen.
Yes.
And say, "Okay, all right, I hear you. We're going to throw everything out and start over.
That's right.
Because I don't want you to hate your life or be in purgatory forever."
No. And I just want to point out that the classical education model leads a child to considering it purgatory.
I know. Yeah, it was a very
Very Dante.
It was a very literate objection. Didn't make it any easier to hear, though.
No, it wouldn't. But here's something that I also learned in that moment. I immediately assumed that meant the rest of my kids also hated their lives.
Oh, this is a really good point.
And it turned out that 2 of them loved the schedule. And so initially I threw it out for everyone. And 2 of my kids floundered. They're like, "I need the calendar back." And I was like, "Yeah, but these unschoolers say no calendar." And I had to really start to see my children as unique human beings, not as a collective homeschool project. And I think that's one of the challenges when you're a parent just learning how to do this, right? You don't know that going in. You find it out on the way.
Yeah. Well, and you have to go into it. with I don't know how to put this exactly. You have to go into it with what I would call a cheerful resignation that you're going to mess it up.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Quote of the day, cheerful resignation.
And then not despair when you hit that point, but be like, oh, okay. That's the cheerful part. You guys can't see me, but I'm being cheerful with my hands. Okay, we're going to back up. And Julie, I love what you say about, also if you're homeschooling multiple kids, you don't have to back up for all of them.
No. And in fact, it's really good to ask them their opinion of how things are going. I remember one of my friends, she used to meet quarterly. She had 3 kids with each child, and she handed them a sheet of paper with all the subjects. And then she said, please grade me on each subject, how I'm doing with you. So it was reversed. Her kids got to say, history's really not working. I love the math program. I think this was really good in English. Unfortunately, I only found out this philosophy, this method after my kids were done. But
I love that so much. Yes, that's awesome.
But isn't that great? I love that she gave her kids the power to, kind of reverse the authority role and let them give that kind of feedback. I tried to ask for those things from my kids, but that was just so concrete and clever. And I thought I'd pass that along because it was such a good idea.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So with being flexible for each individual children, and you had 5, what did that look like in a day?
Practically? Yeah. I mean, that is the trick, isn't it? So one of the things I learned pretty quickly is there's a difference between a schedule and a routine. A schedule is sort of like, imagine you're planning a menu for a full week of meals. And so you go through and you pick out all the recipes, and then you make like a shopping list. And on Sunday, you buy all the ingredients. And now you're going to just execute because you know exactly what you're going to eat. So Monday morning, you have oatmeal and toast. At lunch, you have turkey sandwiches and applesauce. So far, so good. Dinner, you make fried chicken. The next morning, you get up and you do it again. You're like, oatmeal is perfect. And for lunch, you have grilled cheese planned. But your friend calls and says, hey, let's go to the park. I've got lunch. You don't have to make anything. You wrestle with whether you should go because what if you miss making these sandwiches, these grilled cheese sandwiches? They're on the schedule. But you tell your kids, we can go if you promise to eat these sandwiches when you get home. So you go to this park day. They eat all the food the other mom provides. You get home and now you have to stuff them with these grilled cheese because you're going to be off the schedule if you don't.
Yeah.
And for dinner, now you've got another meal and they're not hungry. So you carry those foods over to the next morning. Now they've got leftover grilled cheese, some spaghetti, and the new oatmeal breakfast. Schedule feels like you get behind. Like, oh my gosh, I've got to use everything and do it at a right pace. Routine says we eat 3 times a day. We have all the ingredients in the pantry. If we get a better offer, we're taking it. We're going to leave. And when we come back, we'll just resume the routine. So with my kids, what that looked like is we knew that each day there was read aloud time. There was a time at the table where we did math. There was a time where we put on music, lit candles, and did copy work. There was a time after lunch when we did well-trained mind history. We loved it, right? This was, and we did that like 2 days a week, and we did science 2 days a week, and we had co-op on another day. So that was the routine. But my gosh, if there was children's theater, I just scrapped it. We maybe missed that day's math. We just picked up where we left off the next day, like that. So for me, with kids, it was similar. Like some kids did better sitting at a table. Some did better sitting on the couch, petting the dog while they did their copy work. Sometimes we would move the read aloud to after lunch because everybody needed a change of pace. But it was this feeling of flexibility within the routine that ended up being the exact balance we needed as a family.
I wonder if I could draw a little bit of a parallel to my life as a grown-up. That your experience there is also what I learned with my kids, which is I got up. Look, every Sunday afternoon, I sat down and I made up a list of what we were going to do every day the following week. But as I got more confident with the homeschooling, I wasn't scared to strike through it and say, now, as a mother of grown children, and, I'm still working, my husband has retired, but I am not in a position to do that. Right. So
Totally.
I have a very full schedule. So I get up, I make every Friday actually do my schedule for the following week. And then every Monday I get up, I make the list of what I'm going to do. I work all day. When I get to the end of it, if I look back at the list and there are things that I haven't done, I know that I have 2 choices. I can copy and paste them onto the next day, or I can delete them. Right. But I think that needs to be said because that is a really important part of running your own life and having your own priorities is you make lists, you have goals, you have things that you want to do, but then you also have to be able to get to the point both for you and for your kids where you say, no, strike.
I love that. And I think it's really important to remember how much time you actually have with your kids. 5 to 18 is really long. I remember hearing Jonathan Linval years ago. I don't know if he had research to go with this or not. He was a home educator who spoke at conferences, but he had been in the education space. And he said, basically junior high is a holding cell for prepubescent high schoolers. And what happens in junior high is they just redo everything they did from K through 5th grade to make sure they've got it. And when I heard that, oh my gosh, the relief I felt, I was like, oh, I'm going to have 3 years where I get to really just hone the stuff we were working on. So if they didn't quite get fractions in 4th grade, we're going to really get them in 7th grade. There's this feeling, I think, because of the way school is structured and maybe even now in homeschooling post-COVID, where we have a lot of school at homers rather than learning at homers. There's this feeling that every year has a specific quantity of information that must be mastered. And if you get behind, we hear that language after the pandemic, the whole 2nd grade's behind. I'm like, well, if it's the whole 2nd grade, they're not behind.
Right.
They're just where they are. I think if we adopt this idea that we have time to give our kids the learning they need at the rate they need it, we actually create more room for them to learn it. We're not pressuring them all the time to prove something they aren't ready to prove. I don't know. What do you think, Susan? Have you experienced that?
Yes, definitely. And, this was a related insight is I have one of my cousins is an RN who got her PhD in nursing and now teaches other nurses. And she had 5 boys, one of whom had pretty serious delays and challenges. And she said to me once, she said, gap years are great. Because I'd been talking about how great a gap year was. Where they really need a gap year is when they hit puberty. Because nothing happens that year. Nothing good happens that year. And again, 5 boys in one house. She was like, nothing happens. She was very, and I thought, of course, that would make so much sense to so you take this 13-year-old whose hormones are going crazy. They can't pay attention to anything you say. And you say, for the next year, you're going to go work on the neighboring farm. Goodbye.
Well, we did it. So my 4th child is a boy. And at the end of what should have been 8th grade, go into freshman year of high school, I just knew he wasn't ready. He wasn't interested. And I looked at him and I said, should we just wait a year? I didn't say take a gap year or repeat 8th grade. I just said, should we wait a year before we start high school? And he's like, yes, please. Aww. So we had this amazing year. He did bird watching. He did reading. He's an amazing reader. He worked a lot more on his writing skills. But it was so spacious. And then after high school, he did take yet another year before he went to college. He traveled, he worked, and then he went to college at 20. And today he's this self-taught IT specialist, but his college, you will love, Susan, he went to St. John's in Annapolis, which is a great books program.
It is, yes.
So here you are with this kid where you think, oh, is he behind? He was dysgraphic, all these things. And yet he ended up doing this very serious, deeply philosophical program and ends up in a field he didn't even train for in college. So and he would say that was like the best decision, taking that extra year. So I've never thought about tying it to puberty, but I can see that. It makes so much sense to me.
Yeah. Well, and when my youngest went into middle school, she went into a Montessori school in Williamsburg, which I've talked about this before on the podcast. We decided it was time for her to be in a classroom because all 3 of her brothers were out of the house and it was just her and me.
Yes.
I was doing a bad job because I just wanted to have tea parties. So I took her to the Montessori school and the head mistress there did one of those, oh, you wrote the well-trained mind sort of things. And I said, yeah, and so I went back without my daughter afterwards and I took a bunch of her art projects with me. And I said, look, this is my daughter. See these art projects? She is not going to want to learn Latin. She is not going to want to do any of the things that I described in The Well-Trained Mind. She wants to play with clay. So please don't put those expectations on her. And they were wonderful with her. But here's the funny thing is that after she finished, she went to the Montessori middle school, she went to high school, she took a gap year, she went to college, she killed it. She turned into an academic machine. And
Wow.
I didn't do anything to make this happen. She graduated summa cum laude. My husband and I were both like, wait, what? So having the faith and confidence to just let them be
Yes.
who they turn out to be. Now, it could have been that she turned out to be someone who did not want to go to college and wanted to do an art apprenticeship instead, and that would have been fine.
Yes.
But we just had to wait. And I know that's so hard to do with kids.
You know, I love everything that you're saying, because I think what the mistake I see a lot of homeschooling parents make is they are projecting their fantasies onto their children while they're raising them. You know, I'll hear a mom whose kid really loves Lego and she'll say something like, he's going to be an engineer. And I'm like, we actually don't know that. You
I
know,
hear that a lot too,
right? You know, you have a kid who is trending in a certain direction in high school and even college, and then they pivot and they make a completely different choice. One of my friends, her son hated science, hated math all through high school, didn't perform well on the ACT, and then suddenly got interested in environmentalism and put himself into junior college, got his scores up, and went off and majored in that and is getting a master's in it now. And it seems so strange, right? Like, why wouldn't he have shown those aptitudes earlier? But we don't know what catalyzes interest for our children. All we can do is keep, you know, to use Charlotte Mason's terms, lay the feast of learning in front of them and allow them to have enough experiences that they actually know what their preferences are. My oldest son, Noah, I always joke that he wasn't homeschooled or unschooled because he's an anti-schooled child. He's an anti-schooler. And the other day, he's a self-taught computer programmer. And the other day, he's almost 38, has 3 kids, good job. He told me that this company wants him to go through this training and he has to like be there live. And he's like, I told them, I don't do school. Like he went to college 3 times and quit. Like, this is the ultimate autodidact. Do you know how stressful it is to have a child like that for your firstborn? I felt like such a failure. This is the one who hated his life because I love school. So I'm constantly trying to understand this kid who's teaching himself Klingon and Esperanto, but isn't like interested in biology, right? Like, it's very difficult to trust that all of the twists and turns can work out when you're in the midst of them. So I just want to like say that it's much easier once they've got the job to feel like, okay, phew. But like the 20s were challenging. I don't know how you feel about the 20s, but I think that's like the lost decade no parent talks about. It's hard.
My goodness. Okay. I actually said this to someone at a conference last weekend. I said, you know, I say this to my husband, but I don't say it publicly very often because I don't know how helpful it would be. But sometimes I want to look at parents of elementary school children and toddlers and say, oh, you are so doing the easy part right now.
I know.
This gets so much harder.
And yet, you know, it also gets so much more wonderful too. You know, I like seeing your kids make those choices and do the things that are meaningful to them is like a satisfaction unlike anything I've ever known. Watching my child be a parent, watching my child be successful in a career, watching them get a degree in college or a master's, it's like shocking. And it's really weird. You think when you're raising your kids that everything you do is shaping who they become. And yet by the time they become those things, you're like, wow, I had nothing to do with it. Do you have that weird kind of juxtaposition emotionally?
Yes, most definitely. You're on the one hand, you're like, oh, I did so many good things here. Look at this fantastic child. And then you're like, except I don't think I could take credit for at least half of this.
You're right. No, because they truly are their own person and this is their own path. You know what I mean? It's kind of incredible. It's really incredible. I love it. I mean, I love being a mother and I continue to love it. I have not stopped loving it. But it isn't what I thought it would be when I was young. Yeah, it's a different journey than I was picturing.
We'll be right back.
Do your kids want to ask deeper questions about history, such as, would George Washington win a thumb wrestling match with a T-Rex? Well-Trained Mind Press is here to help. Our figures in motion sets let children bring history to life. Each set contains paper figures of people or creatures from a specific era in both pre-colored and color them in versions to cut out and assemble into movable action figures so your children can create their own historical adventures. Yes, the Genghis Khan figure comes with a falcon. Yes, Leonardo da Vinci comes with a paintbrush. No, we will not stop your child from making Albert Einstein and Joan of Arc take a heartwarming road trip. From the Jurassic period to ancient times to the modern age, there's a figures in motion set for every era. Available at welltrainedmind.com or wherever you buy books.
Okay, we're freaking Susanna out.
No,
right now.
you're not freaking me out at all. I'm trying to articulate my next question, which it relates to what you both have been talking about but trying to kind of bring it back to being in the thick of it with homeschooling. It seems like it would be a challenge in the moment because I'm already thinking in my head, because I have a 1-year-old, so we're at the beginning and we're not even there at homeschooling yet. But like I can see myself being like, but she can't miss fractions. You know what I mean? But so I can see myself doing that. So how do you give yourself the confidence, like scrolling back to when the kids were little and you can't see where they go, to give them the room they need to be themselves? Because that sounds hard to me.
I mean,
All right, you tackle that one first, Julie.
okay. Here's what I think is really kind of surprising about education. The basics are a pretty small part of a whole day. I read, I put this in my book. There was a study done by an organization for literacy that measured attention span in children. And basically, it's age plus 1 minute. So if you have a 5-year-old, they can give you 6 focused minutes. If you have a 9-year-old, they can give you 10. When we're talking about things like math and reading and writing, if you take that truly to heart, we're not going to do more than 8 minutes of writing with a 7-year-old in one sitting. I mean, that would be actually very long for writing for a 7-year-old. Mm-hmm. If you really take that to heart, you will be shocked at how much progress they can make. But what parents do is they burn their kids out on the core skills by expecting hour-long sessions starting at a pretty young age, because that's their memory from high school. You know, they haven't been in an elementary school in a long time. They don't remember that there's a lot of movement, a lot of activity, a lot of short lessons. But short lessons done consistently build the skills. So I always say your number one job as a parent of a young child is to not ruin the subject. Do not make them hate the subject. It is not more important that they learn to write. It's more important that they learn not to hate writing. So whatever tricks you can come up with, multiple pens that are different colors, lighting a candle, playing music, making their favorite snack, doing it on the couch, doing it in the backyard, standing on their head and then writing, taking dictation for them. They talk, you write. Whatever you can do to get them to value the expression of self in writing, that's your job. Your job isn't to be disciplined and force them to do the skill. And so in those early years, the skills matter. But your bigger job is to be what I call the Match.com of learning. You're setting up a dating relationship. You're figuring out how to get the profile right so they'll click yes, swipe right on this subject. I do want to be interested in it.
No, I love that, Julie. I do a workshop called Homeschooling the Real Child.
Yes,
right.
I love that workshop.
Where I basically say, okay, it would be great if you gave the child the book and they said, yay, learning. But real children don't work that way. And so you have to be a little bit crafty. And here are a bunch of different things you can do. And I describe some of, the things that you suggest and then a bunch of other which sound like tricks. I mean, I say, for example, in this workshop, bribes are good.
Yes.
You say to the kid, do the work, do it well, concentrate on it for 15 minutes, and then you can have a cookie. Okay, some people don't do cookies. We did a lot of cookies when I was homeschooling. But why would you not reward a child for doing something difficult? Because people will say to me, well, I want them to learn to love learning for the sake of learning. And I think, okay, no. Loving learning for the sake of learning is something that you mature into.
That's right.
When you're 8, bribe them.
Well, and the thing is, so the language I use to get away from the bribery language, Susan, is
I've embraced the bribery language,
I love it.
But I hear you.
I love it. But for those parents who are cringing, let's just give them the word enchant, right? Enchant the learning. Make it a little bit more magical. Cookies are so effective.
They're so fun.
1,000%. And you can make them as healthy as you want and kids still think they're great. But I remember you sharing a strategy that I thought was really genius. And I think this is another example of how you help kids. For some of the rote work, there's almost no way around it except to do it in a rote fashion, right? Like you're going to chug through all these times tables or whatever.
Yep.
You talked about having sheets at the table, correct me if I'm wrong, and you guys standing, doing one problem and then running to the next page and doing another one and making like a round robin. Genius. Love that. What we're trying to do is keep the child engaged. You cannot control love. Have you watched Matchmakers on those like shows?
Yes.
They're like, hey, look at him. He's got his, doctor degree and he's got a beautiful home. And the woman's like, no, I'm not interested.
I'm not doing this.
Yes.
I wish you guys could see the motions that Julie's making as she's doing this.
Yes. But we can't make someone fall in love. But what we can do is make them not hate it.
Yeah.
And that is really our number one goal. People always say, oh, my child doesn't love writing. I'm like, I would settle for not hating it.
Yeah.
Please
That's
give them a
realistic.
sense of courage and confidence in each arena. Do they have courage and confidence in math? Do they have courage and confidence in reading? Do they have courage and confidence in writing? And these are words you can even use with kids. Do you feel intimidated by fractions? Is that what's going on here? You're telling me you don't want to do this sheet. Is it intimidating? What do you need? Should I sit with you? Should I read the problem aloud and then you do it? Some kids just need what they call a body double, just a partner, someone who's holding space. I need it for working out. I do strength training 3 days a week. Guess what? If I don't go to my workout with my group, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It does not happen. And if I do it on my own, I only do it halfway. Right? Your kids are the same. They're not terrible people for not independently finishing the worksheet. That's not realistic.
I love that perspective. Those of you who listen to this podcast know that I ride horses. I train them in dressage, and I love riding my horses. But I pay a trainer to come out and work with me once or twice a week, because if the trainer doesn't come out and work with me, here's what I do. I did it this morning. I put the saddle on the horse. I go out. We do some walk. We do some trot. We do some canter. And then I'm like, oh, you're such a good girl. I'm going to reward you. And we're going back to the barn. Whereas the trainer says, all right, get that bend, do it again. And so, that's a necessary thing.
It is. And I think it feels supportive, especially, in my book, actually, the book I just published, I have a chapter called Coach or Referee. And in writing, the way I think about it is the referee is the copy editor mindset. It's the evaluator mindset. The coach is the person who empowers you to grow your skills. So if we think about like any traditional sport, like basketball and LeBron James, before he started playing basketball, the job wasn't to learn all the rules. It was to get that ball in the basket, however he could, right? And eventually, it wasn't the referee that made him a star. It's the coaching. You could put your foot this way. You could shoot it that way, and it's more likely to go in. Your body posture is off here if you do it this way, right? Even the most talented people, LeBron James, Simone Biles, benefited from coaches. They're not getting tight with the referee. So that's how we want to think about all education. You're in a coaching role. How can you help them capitalize on their aptitudes, not just show them what they're doing wrong and expect them to fix it on their own?
I want to add something else to this sort of thinking about how we encourage our kids forward. I love everything that you've said about not demanding love. I mean, I think part of, I'm thinking out loud, but y'all have to put up with that. I think part of being a senior homeschooler, that's what I'm calling us here, Julie. I hope you don't mind that.
It's all right.
Is that, having walked our kids through their teens and then their 20s and then their 30s, we have recognized exactly what we can't do.
Truly.
Even if we tried really hard to create love for learning, even if we tried really hard to enthuse them, we know because we tried, I tried it with 4, you tried it with 5, that it doesn't work. If there were a way that it would work, we would tell you guys, but it just doesn't work. So I feel like then maybe another dimension of this recognition of what we can and can't do is that in order to be a good homeschool parent, you have to be healthy yourself. You cannot look at your kids and what they're doing as any sort of validation for you.
Wow.
And that sounds simple, but it's not. It is not, because everything that our kids do, we feel responsible for. And it either casts a good light or a bad light on us. And we're not even just talking about ourselves. We're talking about our parents. We're talking about our in-laws. We're talking about our partner or spouse, possibly. We're talking about the people in the homeschool group. We are always looking at our kids as reflections of whether we are doing a good job.
I mean, that's the hardest thing. We can't blame the school district. We can't blame the math teacher. And society would love to blame us. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see on threads and Twitter people just saying there's absolutely no good homeschool out there and that homeschooling is failing and that those children don't turn out. And so you feel defensive. It's a natural thing to feel when you're in a countercultural move. You're going to feel protective of the decision you made and the desire to champion this cause. But in the end, it's just an educational choice.
Yeah.
You can send them to school. You don't have to homeschool. So what I like to say to parents is care less. Don't be careless, but just care less. When you notice yourself getting really worked up over something, go pick up a hobby, go learn something for yourself. Fall in love with Jane Austen movies. Like do something that stimulates your love of learning because that is contagious.
Yes.
And children see adults do things and they think it means the thing is cool. What isn't cool is being your parent's project. So if every now and then, if your kids are like, we all go through the blahs. So your homeschool's kind of stagnant. They're in the blahs. You're in the blahs. Nothing you're doing is working. Ignore them. Go get interested in life again for yourself in front of them during the middle of the day. And I guarantee you things will pick up again. But if you're waiting for your kids to turn around your homeschool, it will be a long wait.
Yep. I agree with that. Go get a hobby. Also go get a therapist.
Oh yeah, therapist for sure.
Therapist for sure. I was a much better homeschool mom once I was getting therapy.
I mean, honestly. And the thing is, we're always working out our past stuff on our children, right?
Yep.
And so until you are self-aware enough to know that, your kids can't explain to you why you're annoying, but you are, they just know that you are.
Well, kids know when they're being asked for something.
Yes.
But that they can't deliver. And,
Yes.
When you go into the homeschool project and you're working something out yourself, the kid knows that in some way they're falling short, but they don't really know how they're falling short or what to do about it.
It's true.
And, and they'll do one of two things. They'll either get resistant, depending on personality, or they'll sort of crumple,
Right.
So those are things to look out for.
Yes.
That really did go far afield.
and that is perfectly okay. I'm eating it all up, but I'm going to kind of bring us back to our questions, and because we're getting close to time. So I'm going to do a two-parter. And you may have already talked about these things I'm going to ask you about, but just to kind of hit on them quickly, looking back, what has been something that you're really proud of from your homeschool journey? And then one thing that you would do differently?
Okay, what I'm proud of probably the most is that I did inculcate somehow through the mix of all the things we're talking about, kids who feel self-confident about teaching themselves anything they want to know. And they have that in a way that I don't have it, having been a product of public school. I am flabbergasted at their hunger to know. And I'll give you a really funny example. My son, Jacob, is a human rights lawyer, right? Everybody's always very impressed by that. And that's the degree is called a JD, a Juris Doctorate, right? His passion is being a DJ in nightclubs. So I always call him a JD by day and a DJ by night because that is his life. He's also deeply passionate about beach volleyball. And recently, for the very first time, he's living in his own apartment. So now he is a student of interior decorating. And he told me, he said, Mom, I will have the equivalent of a bachelor's degree by the time this apartment is done. This is a child who believes that if he wants to know it, he has a right to, And he can master it to a pretty high level because of his curiosity.
I
And
love that.
all 5 of my kids are like that. And I really credit home education with that drive. And they've all said that they believe that too. It's pretty cool.
You can take some of the credit for that, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Susan.
I'm just claiming it for you here.
I appreciate that. Well, the thing that I would do differently is I would give a lot more room for flexibility sooner, right? I think I'm a natural disorganized person. So I'm not a rigid type A person to start with. So that was helpful, right? Like chaos is a little bit a part of my brand. But because of that, sometimes felt like it meant even more that I was organized. Like if your personality isn't naturally organized, then you're like, I got to double down and do it harder. And so that got broken when my oldest was like junior high age. And then from there, I fell into this weird unschooling world which by the way, was super weird in the 2000s. Like it was not a healthy world. I will just say that right now. And I had to sort of wake up from that world and realize actually these are just a whole array of options and I can draw on principles from a whole bunch of them. And this is really what led me to writing The Brave Learner. Honestly, Susan, was I wanted to call attention to the value of a variety of ways of knowing and learning, right? And I used to read your book and I used your materials and I found a way to do it that matched how our family was, right? I didn't follow your schedules at the back of the book, which I remember you saying you didn't even follow. And that was helpful, right? But it informed us so much so that one of my kids wanted a classical education. So I think that would be the thing that I regret, but it's not, regret's the wrong word. I was just learning. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 20s and 30s, you know? So young.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. I feel like the theme that emerged from this episode was a lot about flexibility and matching the education to your child, not the other way around, which I really appreciate. And I think it's so important to keep in mind when you're actually in the trenches is that, you know, schedules can change. The kids will be okay, which we talk about all the time in the podcast. But I think that these reminders are so important and always inspirational to hear your story, Julie.
Oh, thank you.
You know, and I think one of the only ways when because I'm just thinking back to being a young mother surrounded by children and we moved back to the family farm. We had separate houses, but my mother lived next door. I mean, talk about having an eye on you.
Yeah.
You really do need to find, and I did not have this, you need to find people who are older, more experienced, and don't have anything at stake in what you're doing to give you some support and some feedback. The only way that you're going to know, again, speaking from experience, whether it's okay to back off and be flexible is if someone else from the outside looks at you and says, yes, that is the right thing to do. And that's just a reality of being young and having young children. How are you supposed to know this? You don't know this, right? It was just one of the reasons why I keep telling people therapy, because then at least you have an outside voice that is not a relative. You know, I love relatives. Relatives are great, but it's a different relationship to say, no, you're okay and they're okay. So I guess one of the challenges with homeschool groups is that everybody tends to be the same age.
Yes, truly. And I think it's why a podcast like yours, podcasts like mine are helpful because we are trying to bring in like sources. I also think it's really important to say that homeschooling is not the only contribution that you should be reading to the story of education.
Oh,
like
that's
I
a good
have
point.
read so many people who are in traditional education environments because they've dedicated their lives to the thoughts that go with what it means to learn. And they've made enormous contributions to the way that I teach, ideas I had for various subject areas. So don't feel like if it's written by a teacher, it's not good. Just pick through it. Find the things that are valuable to you. See the whole world as a place to learn from, right? I think it's really important. And you can't go wrong, ultimately. Do the best you can.
I do feel like the suspicion of the quote unquote educational establishment is not as spiky as it was maybe in the 2000s. The 2000s were pretty rough.
Yes.
That way.
And the 80s, when you were homeschooled.
The 80s were even worse, yes.
They were way worse.
Oh, they were way worse. And who knows what will happen in the future. But there is so much good research and so much experience out there that you can glean from.
That's what I think too.
Well, we are coming up on our hour, so I want to to make good on the promise we made at the beginning of this episode and give you a chance to tell us about the book that you have out.
Oh my gosh. So this is a book that my publisher asked me to write, and I was resisting writing it because I have a company and I've been writing about writing for 25 years and I have products. So why does anyone need a book? By Julie. Like, hasn't she said enough? And they said back to me something that really spoke to me. They said, yes, you've written curriculum, but you don't have a book about writing. The kind of thing someone could listen to on a walk or while they're washing dishes, where they can just sit with your philosophy and not do anything about it right away. And boy, the second my editor said that, I knew I needed to write it, because the practices rest on a foundation of understanding the perspective of writing that I bring, which is that we want to cultivate the writing voice of human beings first. I say my big, bold claim in this book is we write for ourselves first and readers second. The goal of writing is to give us like an opportunity to stand outside our bodies and actually look at our thinking in a third-party way so that we get to know our thoughts, how we make sense and meaning in the world. And that is being rapidly eroded right now by ChatGPT and AI. I have a chapter about that in my book. There was, Susan, did you see that TikTok trend where brand new wives were angry when they found out their husbands wrote their vows using ChatGPT?
I did not see that.
And I thought, isn't that classic? The lack of confidence that you can't even write from the heart for your wedding is a tragic result of the way writing is often taught. And so my goal is to reverse that trend, you know, in whatever small way I can. So Help My Kid Hates Writing. It's good for parents who have kids who love writing as well, but feel unsure of how to support that writer.
That's awesome. And I'll put a link for that in the show notes. And could you also tell our listeners the name of your podcast, but I'll also put it in the show notes for those who aren't on the go. They can click on it.
It's just Brave Writer to go with the company. So bravewriter.com, the podcast link is there, but it's also searchable anywhere. And I have an author website finally, Susan.
Oh, yay!
JulieBogartWriter.com. It's literally months old. So after all this time, I realized I needed one. So we've got it now.
Well, thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Falari at ajfalari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.